Although what I'm about to tell you may sound like one of your run-of-the-mill horror movies, I swear by the validity of it and what I saw. It all started on a very hot July day this past year. My car is almost 20 years old and sometimes overheats on hot days, just like this one. However, until I get a better paying job, it's the car I'm stuck with. This day, I was driving through the back roads looking for a family of dog breeders a friend had told me about. I'd been searching for the place for several hours and was approaching the warmest part of the day. As per usual, my car began overheating and I was forced to pull over. I picked up my phone to call my girlfriend, only to see that my battery was dead. After I spent a couple of minutes cussing my luck, I acknowledged that I was going to have to find someone with a working phone. That wasn't going to happen unless I started walking. Soon, I spotted an old farmhouse off in the distance and headed toward it. A trip that would have taken half an hour on a normal day took almost an hour because of the oppressive heat. I had to take several breaks during the course of the journey, but eventually made it. The area around the house looked more like a junkyard. Parts of old cars spread about, and I had to weave through a maze of them to reach the front door. I knocked on the door for several minutes, but got no answer. Thinking maybe that the homeowner may be hard of hearing, I walked around and looked into the windows hoping to see someone inside. At the side of the house, I spotted the telephone hanging on the wall just inside the kitchen. Now that I knew that there was a phone, I became excited and started calling out for someone. Even after walking all the way around, no reply came. I was about to get myself in. Now in hindsight, that was just as scary. But before I entered, however, I took a piece of paper from a notebook I carry with me and wrote out a note explaining what I was doing there. Even then, I called out several times as I approached the bedroom. Still no answer came, and I continued toward the room. The closer I got to the woman, the more her appearance began to unnerve me. She was laying flat on her back and staring blankly at the ceiling, but her eyes sat completely still. Regardless, I got closer and, once I was within a few steps, handed her the note. When the note touched her hand, she didn't react. This caused me to get closer, and this was when I realized something was very wrong. Her face had a very dry, almost mummified look to it. Her hair was a vibrant black, a color not often seen on older females. She had to have known I was there by that point, but her eyes stayed fixed. This is what caused me to lean in even closer and look into her eyes. Rather than being slightly bloodshot or moist-looking like most people's, they had a shiny, glassy appearance, like they were fake. In spite of this, not until I actually touched her did I know for sure that she was dead. I realized that perhaps she was a mannequin rather than a human, so I reached down to touch her bare hand. The texture of her skin was dry, but stone cold to the touch. The oddity of this was just beginning to really sink in when a loud creaking noise came from behind me. Without a second thought, I tore out of there and ran back down the road in the direction of my car. Within a half of a mile, I ran into an older man in a truck, and thankfully he agreed to give me a ride back into town. I said nothing about my experience to him, and any time he attempted to make small talk, I said as little as I could, on the off chance that he may have been involved in what happened to that woman. He let me borrow his phone to call me. When he let me out there, I thanked him and he went on his way. Once I was safely inside my girlfriend's car, I borrowed her phone to call the police. I hadn't even told her about it yet, so the look of shock on her face as I described what I saw showed me what my expression likely was at the time I discovered it. The cops said they'd send out a car to the house to check out my claims. I called a wrecker next to pick up my car. The police never called me back, so after waiting 3 days, I called to inquire about what they found. It took a few minutes to find a person aware of my call, but once I did, the officer said that he and his partner searched the entire property and found nothing out of the ordinary, especially not a mummified woman. I thanked them and hung up. What happened after I fled, I can only guess. The noise behind me was probably... To tell you the truth, I'm not sure what I saw in that house, on that bed. I am positive that I saw a human lying on that bed, but that's all. More than once, I've been tempted to grab a camera and return to the house to get proof of my claims, but fear of the unknown and what else could be waiting for me if I did has stopped me. If the nightmares of her soulless eyes continue, however, I may have no other choice. What I'm sharing may not be as serious as many of the other stories I've seen, but one recent incident in particular has led me to think I should reach out to someone for advice. I'm a 24-year-old female that has just lost my job as a personal assistant to a mid-level executive in the fashion industry. My termination came so quickly I was unable to find another job in the same line of work before my rent came due. Desperation drove me to apply for a waitress job at a small family restaurant near my apartment. Despite having no prior history waiting tables, I got the job. I guess the owners were as desperate as I was at that moment. My first shift was on a Monday afternoon, and I soon came to realize I enjoyed the work. Most of the customers were regulars. They were very kind and understanding of my hiccups and tipped well. It didn't take long for me to catch on, and I was allowed to take as many shifts as I wanted. Before I knew it, I'd got my bills paid for the month and even had a little left over for a celebratory bottle of wine. As I write this, I've worked at the restaurant for 3 months, and almost every minute on the clock has been a blast. Crazy, right? Yeah, I know it's not a sentence I'd ever expected to say when I agreed to take the job. At first, my intention was to stay only long enough to get another fashion-related job, but finding out I was good at the table waiting thing has greatly increased my self-esteem. Not to mention, the money is good. I can't say I had any complaints about the job until a few weeks ago. On a late Sunday evening, one of the regulars up until I waited on him the following lunch shift. He had been on an extended vacation, and now that I've met him, I wish he would have stayed where he was. The customer in question is a 64-year-old gentleman who recently retired from the drilling industry. Not exactly my type, I must say, and a bit too old for me. My introduction to him wasn't any more strange than any of the other regulars. However, the way in which he stared at me the entire time made me nervous. Then he left me a $100 tip on a $6.50 tab. My initial reaction was one of joy, but as I dwelled upon it, I became uncomfortable with taking it. His return on that Thursday afternoon escalated my discomfort to an entire new level. I attempted to wait on him, as he was just another customer, but his reasons behind the massive tip soon became obvious. When I took his drink order, he asked me if I appreciated my large tip. This gave me the opportunity to tell him I wasn't comfortable taking a tip that large, but he interrupted me before I had the chance and hinted that I was now beholden to go on a date with him. The idea disarmed me. I wasn't sure that he meant what I thought, but just to be safe, I returned the $100 bill to him. The last thing I wanted to be seen as was some form of prostitute. When he was young, some women who waited tables may have sold themselves, but this girl is no whore. When I handed the bill back to him, a look of shock appeared on his face, soon followed by a big smile. All he could say was, "I've never seen a woman turn down a $100 bill. Now I see how it's going to be." This reaction confused me. It was exactly the opposite of what I'd hoped for. I expected him to get mad, or at least get that I wasn't for sale. Him thinking I was playing hard to get scared me a little. However, I did consider that maybe I was perhaps misunderstanding what he meant. Our age gap could be making me misconstrue his intentions. It was possible he was only trying to show his appreciation for my services. The remainder of his time in the restaurant that day, I said very little to him, and he met me with his usual fawning gaze. Once he left, a load of relief was lifted from my shoulders. It was short-lived, however, when I returned to the table and saw the $100 bill sitting there. This was beginning to look like some type of game he was playing with me. I had the impression that once I accepted that tip, I would be accepting of much more in his mind. This brings us up to a few days ago, when he was once again seated in my section.
Before I could do anything, I had to make it clear that I could not accept that $100 tip. Once again, I handed it back to him and told him that I was in a long-term relationship and could not go out with him, even once. My speech didn't appear to make a dent in his facade. He replied by saying that he had no idea what I was talking about, but as he said it, a sly, childish grin was pasted on his face. I was starting to become angry at the way he was acting and stormed off to get his drink. By the time I made it back, something had very much changed in his demeanor. The usual doting and loving eyes had disappeared and been replaced by a simmering fury I would have never expected to come from him. His grin was no longer there. His face had become expressionless and cold. When I noticed this change, a jolt of fear shot through me. From that point, nothing else was said between us. One thing had not changed, however. When I returned to the table, the $100 bill was sitting there, but it was now joined by a small folded piece of paper. I unfolded it and saw that it was a brief handwritten note. It simply read, "It would benefit you to accept this." A shiver tore through me. I was almost positive he didn't intend this to be friendly. Although it wasn't necessarily threatening sounding, his attitude change gave me the impression it was a helpful hint. The entire predicament has made me confused and unsure of how to move forward. On one hand, the gentleman has not come out and clearly threatened me in any way. Up until our last interaction, he was nothing but happy and kind towards me. He also has never actually claimed to want to go on a date with me. As a matter of fact, he denied that this was his desire when I confronted him about it. To top it all off, I don't know one waitress who would dare turn down a $100 tip and see it as anything other than a show of thanks for good service. When it comes to the change of personality, for all I am aware, something terrible could have occurred while I had gone getting his drink. It may have zero to do with me. On the other, however, his instance that I accept the large tip clearly makes me uncomfortable. He has to be able to see this. Continuing to insist I accept it should be a bad sign. The split-second change in his attitude after I told him I was not interested was more than likely connected, even if it was not. The speed at which he could become so different and the darkness of his eyes would certainly give anyone pause. As if it even needs to be said, putting the tip and the ominously written note together with the very unsettling interaction we had just had, I am of the almost 100% belief that I was being threatened. Nevertheless, even after writing this, I am completely at my wit's end and have no idea of how to proceed. This gentleman is a long-time customer of the restaurant, and up until a few days ago, I've had nothing but positive, if not slightly difficult, interactions with him. Since my grandparents had passed away before I was born, I've spent very little time with people of his age, and I'm afraid I have mistaken harmless flirting with that of a predator. Therefore, I put this to you. What action do you think I should take next? Am I being an oversensitive snowflake, or do you see trouble in my future? Any feedback will be taken into account and considered. I definitely wouldn't be putting myself out like this if I didn't feel I may be in trouble. I need help, and I need it now.
Back when I was 13 years old, I was in middle school, and I really needed a math tutor who would give me classes since I was very bad at math and struggling. I considered my circle of friends very big, so I asked around for any recommendations for math tutors who would give me classes. And to my surprise, about 4 of my friends recommended the same person. Someone we'll call C for this story. I asked for C's number and they gave it to me. Then I texted him and asked him all about the classes. Questions like what time he would be available to come over and what the price of the class would cost. We discussed and planned a little bit, and then soon I'd be having my first class with him within a week. I was both nervous and ready. I wasn't a lazy or bad student, and it killed me that I couldn't get a grip of this math. So I was ready to bring my grades back up, but I was also nervous because I just didn't know this guy. Well, he came over just in time, and we sat at a desk I have at my house. C was middle-aged, which really made me uncomfortable, but my parents seemed to like the guy. He presented himself well, and I had to give him credit for that. Besides, I had an important test coming up in some weeks, and I didn't know a thing, so there was no going back. The classes actually went really well. He was a patient and good teacher, and everything was normal. C was funny too, which made the classes pleasant of all things. The weeks went by, and I finally had to take my big math test, and I actually got a good grade on it. Seeing that my grades came up like that so quickly, I decided to keep studying with C, because I'd be starting geometry soon, and I already knew how bad I was at that subject as well. Classes were fun with C, and everything was fine. My friends gave me really good comments about him, and I soon stopped feeling uncomfortable about his age. Time went by, and everything was great, until one class. My school has guidance class second period, and we usually do nothing, so I talk to people and fool around. I was talking to a friend of mine one day about how nervous we were for the upcoming test, and she asked me who was my tutor. She knew I had one, but she didn't know who, and I told her it was C. The teacher walking by heard me mention him, so she asked me if he was my tutor. I said yes, but she gave me this shocked expression. I'd never seen her that way, and no lie, it gave me chills. She told me that I need to stop seeing him immediately. She said that he harasses his students once he gains their trust, and she told me a story of a girl who studied with him. She trusted him a bit too much, and C began to touch her. She became uncomfortable and began to back away from C, but C would keep touching and harassing her. It came to the point where her mother reported him to the police, but they couldn't do anything since they didn't have enough evidence and couldn't arrest him. Not to mention at the time he was well trusted and liked around the community. I was actually shocked when I heard this. I asked my teacher if there were any more victims, and she said yes, but most of them are too afraid to come forward to the police, so they go to the school psychiatrist, who was the teacher I was talking to, since it was the guidance class. She continued, saying that he would often do magic tricks to gain trust. I remembered a time where he showed me how he made an eraser disappear and reappear. Everything she was warning me about, he was doing. Stop seeing him. I told them everything. We stopped contacting C, and we blocked his number. But that didn't stop him from showing up at my house. He stopped by one day, asking my parents if I still needed help, and by then I told my parents everything. They told him to leave and to never come back, but I'll never forget the look he gave me as I watched from the living room. Even after hearing the bad news that I would no longer need a mentor and that we knew about his terrible past, he stood there with a smile, baring his teeth at me. He stared straight into my eyes, and it's almost like he was telling me that this wasn't the last I would see of him. I had nightmares after that. To this day, I'm scared to get another tutor for any classes. I'm very much in disbelief I was in a situation like that, and I'm thankful that one of my teachers knew about C. I don't want to know what C would have done to me if we spent more time together, and luckily, I haven't heard from him since.
I'd gone the first 22 years of life without having any near-death experiences and hoped to make it through the rest the same way. Unfortunately, a month ago, I was put in such a terrifying position, I was afraid my life was about to end. The gist of the story is that I was the victim of mistaken identity. From what I've been able to gather in the interim, a former female employee was having a tryst with a fellow male employee, and her boyfriend or ex-boyfriend, I'm still not sure, did not approve of the relationship. I want to start by saying that I never worked with or even knew the woman in question. Being a gay man, she wouldn't have been my type if I had. A couple of people that were around when she was told me that she and the man she was sleeping with had been fired a good 6 months prior to my employment. The unlucky coincidence appears to be that he and I shared the same first name and physical description. This had to have been why I was confused with him. A quiet evening in July, I was working, waiting tables, and just before 7:30, I got a single male sat in my section. He didn't look especially mean upon first sight, but he was a rather large man. I'm 5'11", and this man, he confronted me about the affair. "So you're the loser that's banging my girl?" I asked him to repeat what he'd said, and only got more hostility in return. "You heard me, boy. Ginger told me about your affair last night." His demeanor terrified me. I knew if he wanted, he could easily destroy me. Fighting had never been my forte, and a guy his size would have no trouble laying me out. I did my best to assure him I didn't know his girlfriend, but this only made him angrier. "Listen, you can deny it all you want, but she told me your name and what you look like. Saying you don't know her is just making me more mad." I could see the hate burning in his eyes. He spoke with gritted teeth, and spittle was beginning to come out of the corners of his mouth. My shaking had to have been obvious to him. I was on the verge of running away, but I didn't want to come off as any bigger a coward than I already was. "I'm sorry, sir. I in no way want to make you angry, but I swear that I've never met a girl named Ginger in my entire life. If she worked here, it must have been before I started. I literally only worked here for a few months. Any relationship I had ever had hasn't even included a female, if you get my meaning." It took a moment, but he caught on, and his scowl morphed into a smug grin in seconds. Telling a complete stranger about my preferences wasn't a discussion I wanted to have. However, I was out of ideas and decided on the Hail Mary. "You look like one of those deviants, but it's going to take a lot more to convince me than that." Playing that card must have been a bad idea. Although his voice had lowered slightly, he was balling his hands into fists, and this made my trembling worse. "Why don't you man up and admit you were balling my girl? You got a whooping coming either way. If you admit it, I might be a bit easier on you." It was as if he hadn't heard anything I'd said since he first accused me. The whole time this had been going on, I hadn't been aware of what else was going on around me. Someone in the restaurant, perhaps a patron, had notified my manager what was happening at this table. He came around just as the man had threatened to assault me and interrupted the conversation. "Excuse me, sir. I just overheard your threat toward my employee, and that is something I cannot allow customers to do. I'd like you to leave immediately, or I'll be forced to call the police." "You can call whoever you want. I don't care. I'm just here to tell this little wimp I'm going to give him a stomping for banging my Ginger." The manager's threat didn't seem to make any difference to the man. He was still just as mad before and wasn't showing any signs of leaving. "Sir, if you mean Ginger, the girl who left here more than 6 months ago, I can almost guarantee you that this young man never had any interactions with her. Now, there was another young man with the same name as him that I was forced to fire the same time as Ginger. I inform every employee at the time they are hired that relationships between employees are forbidden, especially when one of those employees are management. A rumor that they were violating this policy reached me, and when asked about it, they both confirmed it. Because of this, they were both terminated that same day. This young man is a new employee, and to my knowledge does not know the situation. Like I said, I can't have people coming into my restaurant and threatening my employees. You heard the real story, so now you can leave. And please do so now." The entire time my manager spoke, he never raised his voice, except for the end. Even then, he kept his composure. I think because of this, the man finally started to believe what I had told him. He stood up at the table, and he must have been at least 6'5". One more shudder of fear shot through me when I realized how massive he was. "Okay, mister. I'm gonna go and have a talking to Ginger again. And if I find out you lied to me, I'm coming back and putting both of you down." The man then turned for the exit. "I'd recommend you not do that, sir." My manager hit him with one more parting shot as he left, but the giant ignored it. Once he was gone, I could finally breathe again. After I took a few minutes to calm myself, I returned to work, or when I get off. He's had a permit to carry a handgun for some time, so this safety measure does make me feel secure. I don't think he's really worried about himself. Since we have our own parking area in the back of the building, not many other people come back there. I'm not even sure many other people know about it. I, nor anyone else, have seen the man since that night, but will probably continue with the escorts for the foreseeable future. I pray each day I leave for work that I won't see that monster ever again. If he does return, I'll update my post. However, I'm pretty sure if he was going to, he would have by now. Let's hope I'm right.